Welcome to the book of First Nephi, chapter 1 in the Book of Mormon. We're going to have some fun today in talking about this story. Before we get too far into the story of Lehi and his family, I also want to make sure we provide some context as to what is going on in this time period that Lehi is raising his family in. Now, at the beginning of this, there's a kind of a unique a chapter heading that is part of the Book of Mormon here. So I'm going to read that first. An account of Lehi and his wife Sariah and his 4 sons being called, beginning at the eldest, Laman, Lemuel, Sam, and Nephi. The Lord warns Lehi to depart out of the land of Jerusalem, because he prophesieth unto the people concerning their iniquity, and they seek to destroy his life. He taketh 3 days' journey into the wilderness with his family. Nephi taketh his brethren, and returneth to the land of Jerusalem after the record of the Jews. The account of their sufferings: they take the daughters of Ishmael to wife, they take their families and depart into the wilderness. Their sufferings and afflictions in the wilderness, the course of their travels: they come to the large waters. Nephi's brethren rebel against him. He confoundeth them and buildeth a ship. They call the name of the place Bountiful. They cross the large waters into the promised land, and so forth. This is according to the account of Nephi, or in other words, I, Nephi, wrote this record. So the son of Lehi, named Nephi, his youngest son as of this point in history, because he has 2 sons later on, is writing this record, compiling this information that we're using here at the beginning of the Book of Mormon. So let's put this in a little bit of context. Lehi is raising his family around 600 BC in the city of Jerusalem. So if we think of this time, Jerusalem is in the Middle East. This is an interesting time because Assyria has been the predominant ruling nation in the area. Assyria came in around the 700s BC and took over the area and conquered Jerusalem, the whole land of Israel, the whole area. And as well as like most of the Middle East was the Assyrian nation. Now, this point in time is really a fascinating time because there's a lot of things that are going on. So Assyria is this big nation. They've been having troubles with one of the parts of the Assyrian nation that is further east in Persia area. This is where the Babylonian groups are, so like present-day Iraq, Iran area. The Medes, who are precursors to the Persians, and the Babylonians, who are some of the older, more ancient groups, are causing problems for the Assyrian nation. And so we're getting this situation where the Medes and the Babylonians gather together, and they end up conquering the nation of Assyria and taking Assyria over. And as they do, they conquer also this land of Jerusalem and the Palestine area. And they take it over, and then they own it. And so it's now change of management, if you will, change of government. Babylon is running the area. And so lots of commotion, lots of war, lots of change happening, a lot of things that are going on at this time. So Lehi, as a man, he's got 4 sons, and they're all old enough to do things, to function, do things. So Nephi is probably mid-teenage years, somewhere between 14 and 18. So Sam and Lemuel and Laman are probably late teens, early to mid 20s. Laman might be even mid 20s time frame for him. Which means Lehi has to be probably around 40, 50 years old. So he's getting, as lifespans go in this time period, he's getting up there in age. But that means that Lehi has seen the Assyrian nation be taken over with Babylon. He's seen all these changes and challenges that have happened through his lifetime. So a lot of adjustments and challenges that we're going to see as we go through this story. So I want to give some more context from other scholars that have said some things. Hugh Nibley, in his book, this was An Approach to the Book of Mormon, Volume 6, has a quote here from Cyrus Gordon that talks about this time period. He says, he quotes Cyrus as saying, Palestine happened to be the point of maximum synthesis where Mesopotamian, Egyptian, and Mediterranean influences fused with the native Canaanite culture. A picture of what was happening is clearly reflected in the narratives. Abraham was of Mesopotamian origin, and his son and grandson married girls from their kin in Mitanni. At the same time, Egyptian blood was in the patriarchal household. Hagar was Egyptian and was also her son Ishmael's wife. Moreover, famine repeatedly drove the patriarchs to Egypt from Abraham's time on. Canaan itself was a melting pot of Semite, Hurrian, Keftorian, and other groups. The patriarchal Hebrews enjoyed the ideal spot and the ideal time to fall heir to the rich and varied heritage of the entire ancient Near East, when Egypt and Babylonia were nearly spent. Furthermore, the pastoral and semi-nomadic purity of patriarchal life saved the Hebrews from the decadence of that cosmopolitan age. All this applies with equal force to the age of Lehi as described in the Book of Mormon, not omitting Lehi's fight to the Semitic nomadic purity of patriarchal life, which was so resented by his elder sons, the spoiled children of that cosmopolitan age. Every year, new finds are revealing some new and heretofore unsuspected phase of the astoundingly cosmopolitan world in which Lehi lived. So Egypt is in this conflict that's been happening. Egypt is not a fan of Assyria. In fact, Assyria tries to take Egypt out, and Egypt holds them back. But the challenge is with Babylonian conquest coming in, that bodes ill for Egypt, and so Egypt ends up actually siding with Assyria, and they fight at the Battle of Carchemish against Babylon and the Persians as well. So, I mean, there's conflict going on, and the Palestine area is so in the middle of all this. Now, through all this, we have the Jerusalem Israeli nation is still there. Judah and Benjamin are still the tribes that are in and around Jerusalem. The northern tribes were taken by Assyria and scattered all over the place a long time ago, more towards Isaiah's time frame. Lots of things are happening with that. So trade is happening all over Assyria. In fact, it's interesting, and Hugh points this out. We're going to talk about this here in a little bit. Laman and Lemuel's names are more Arabic in culture. And so Lehi, as a merchant, his job was to go out and trade, go on these big trade caravans up to buy and sell goods and bring them back to buy and sell in the local area. And so there's a lot of Arab influence in what Lehi is doing at the early part of his years. But then Sam and Nephi actually are more Egyptian names. And so we can see a stronger Egyptian influence on him at that same time. So all this is happening, okay, basically that's going on. So Babylon has recently come through the area, and that's right after Babylon moves through Palestine and takes over that area, is about where we find ourselves in this story. But so much is happening. Egypt and Palestine have created a lot of trade routes with each other, a lot of trading partners. There's a lot of prosperity, a lot of things going on that's benefiting Lehi and his family as they live around Jerusalem. Here's another quote Hugh Nibley brings up in his book. He says, a newly found papyrus from the 4th century BC, so about 200 years after this 600 BC time frame, Wilkin has shown illustrates conditions in Lehi's day as well, and deserves to be cited here because it has survived as an original document and in considerable detail. It is a legal text in which certain merchants living as far apart as Carthage in Africa, Massilia in France, and Elia in Greece pool their resources to form a company for importing oil and aromatics from South Arabia and Central Africa to Alexandria, which is in Egypt. The raw product had to be sold to the king of Egypt for 46 drachmas per metric, and he in turn immediately resold it to manufacturers for 52 drachmas, and continued to exercise nominal control over every stage of the manufacture of the cosmetics. Yet, from first to last, the actual operations were carried on by private individuals and companies, to whom the king allowed a fair profit, likewise guaranteeing protection from pirates and caravan raiders. Thanks to the peculiar willingness of the merchants to be content with the huge profits they were getting, this arrangement proved amazingly stable and workable. The system was going full blast in the time of Hatshepsut, 1,000 years before this particular document, and in the 3rd century AD, 600 years later. In Lehi's day, the most secure and prosperous of all, it was at its height. So much happening at this time. Lots of trade through the whole area like that. They discovered that document. I mean, trade from Africa way up into Gaul, which is France area in Europe, over into Balkan areas, down through the Middle East. I mean, just all over this place. Lots of trade that is happening, and Lehi has been participating in this. Another comment Hunebli made is, he says, by the 6th century, hopeful parties of Greeks were everywhere being turned back by the discovery that other settlers, usually Phoenicians, but often other races as well, had already occupied the best spots. As the pickings became poorer, explorations became more daring and settlement projects more ambitious. Merchants and settlers in Lehi's day were already moving along the Atlantic seaboard and into the heart of Asia and even the Far East. In the year Lehi left Jerusalem, the Egyptian government sent an expedition consisting largely of Syrian and Phoenician personnel sailing clear around Africa from east to west. Shortly after, the Phoenicians reacted to the challenge by sending Hanno on the same mission of circumnavigation in the opposite direction. In the middle of the 6th century, Skylax reconnoitered the coasts of the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean from the Euphrates to the Indus, while in the west, Carthage reconnoitered the Atlantic Ocean to north and south with mighty fleets. The Phoenicians ended a long phase of fierce mercantile competition in the Mediterranean by burning the great trading city of Tartessus, Isaiah's Tarshish of the proud ships, closing the whole western Mediterranean and Atlantic areas to all trade but their own in 530 BC. So that's a lot of trade happening. They're going around the continent of Africa. They're going around the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, over into India. A lot of overland trade happening. They're starting to get into more Asian areas. In fact, around this same time, that's interesting, is not just an explosion of trade, but even religions and beliefs started to shift and adjust as well, as Buddhism actually is going to begin around 600 BC itself. So there's lots of discussions and lots of ideas and things that are happening. One other quote, let's see, this is actually from Hunebli's book, The Prophetic Book of Mormon. He makes an interesting statement here. He says, one point that every passing year makes clearer is the complete ethnic mix, not only of the people of the Americas, but no less of those in the Book of Mormon. With Lehi, we already have a rich mixture of Near Eastern blood. He was of the tribe of half Manasseh, which may mean that he was half Aramaic or Arabic to begin with. The family of Ishmael, belonging in that same tradition, with a name like that, should almost certainly have been of the desert strain. The Manasseh part was in turn half Egyptian, and the Egyptians from the beginning were a blend of nomads, cattle raisers, farmers, Africans, Asiatic Semites, and Hamites. The infiltration of these people began in the earliest times and mounted steadily through the centuries, families of every class enjoying strong infusions of foreign blood. In Lehi's day, both Egypt and Palestine were swarming with Greek mercenaries and sailors. The Egyptian fleet was Corinthian, in fact, which may explain the few Greek names that pop up in the Book of Mormon. Zoram was a servant or slave and hence probably not an Israelite. To the very end, his descendants form a distinct ethnic group in the New World. So Lehi's company and the Mulekites, and especially the Jaredites from the primal mixing and mustering center of the tower, were already about as mongrel as people you could find when they arrived in the New World. So this is talking about like naming and heritage and bloodlines that have come through on these stories in the Book of Mormon. Because the Book of Mormon, if you remember from the Understanding the Book of Mormon video we did, there's 4 major nations that are talked about through the whole Book of Mormon. And they all originate primarily from this Middle Eastern area. at different times. And so they have similar blood, but yet this whole Middle Eastern area is such a cacophony of lots of different types of people that have blended together. And the Assyrians really ramped this up because when Assyria conquered this area around 700 BC, they took those 10 northern tribes out, but they also brought other people in and mixed them. This is where, in Jesus' time, if you remember in the New Testament, the story of Samaritans comes into play. Samaritans are kind of a half-Jew, half-blood Jew type idea. So the Jews in Jerusalem dislike them because they're not fully Jewish. They're part Gentile and part Jewish because of that Assyrian mix that happened, as well as later on as well. So that's where the Samaritans come from, basically, is that mix. And so that mixture is really happening a lot at this time that Lehi is in the area as well. As we've always mentioned, Laman and Lemuel, Lehi's two oldest, their names are more Arabic, whereas Sam and Nephi are more Egyptian in origin. And then Zoram is a servant that comes with them as well. He's probably not Israelite at all. Let's see, but it is in the New World itself that the mixing really goes on. Nephites and Lamanites from time to time freely mingle. Lamanite warriors favored stolen Nephite brides. Nephites, like the priests of Noah and the people of Amulon, gladly took Lamanite wives. Throughout the Book of Mormon, there are from time to time massive migrations toward the north and east, the equivalent of the American frontier in the Western movement. These found extensive evidence of previous inhabitants in the land, not all of them Jaredites, though the Jaredites were swarming by the millions, while Zarahemla flourished as a great city to the south. Though Zarahemla is the center of the action in the Book of Mormon, it was not a Nephite city at all, but one of the Mulekites. And the Mulekites brought no records with them from Jerusalem. They were apparently more numerous and heterogeneous than Lehi's company. What everyone has overlooked, however, is that the mestizos of both North and South America, whether from the Spanish or Portuguese side, are as qualified to be called Israelites as the Nephites themselves were. For as is well known, for 7 centuries the people of Spain and Portugal mingled and intermarried with their large and important Jewish populations. We have underestimated, or rather completely ignored, the European strain of Jacob in the New World. Ethnically, we find in Mesoamerica what the Book of Mormon should expect us to find if we read it with any care. These Pacific Basin people whom the Spanish invaders found in Mexico showed a crossbred physiognomy embracing every physical feature and skin color known anywhere around the earth. They were so crossbred that they could no longer be spontaneously differentiated into separate color races. This crossbreeding is most advanced in Mexico and India today, but now embraces all the European features as well. Every variety of angular pattern variation in physiognomy is found in both countries in every skin color and every shade from intensely dark to intensely light. Hair ranges through every known variety between straight to tight curly in every hue from black to platinum blonde. And all varieties of hair adorn all varieties of skin color and all degrees of shading from dark to light, which in turn adorn all varieties of facial features and head shapes, wherefore few Mexican individuals can be identified as being of any hybrid race. They are simply worldians. The worldian theme is very prominent in the Book of Mormon. So a lot of stuff that happens. We think of the idea of Lehi and his family coming from Jerusalem area, so they're clearly of Israelite blood because that's where their family descends from. But there's mingling with Egyptians, there's mingling with Arabs, there's mingling, the Samaritans are mingling with Gentile groups and coming down. So much that's going on that is changing this around this. So fascinating. So let's talk about some of this with Lehi's trade. So he is a merchant. He is trading. There's all this trading that's happening all over the known world at the time, basically. Babylon has been marching through, has taken out most of Assyria by the time the Book of Mormon starts. In fact, Hughley made a comment about Lehi. He says, one might, in a speculative mood, even detect something of Lehi's personal history in the names he gave to his sons. The first two have Arabic names. Do they recall his early days in the caravan trade? The second two have Egyptian names, and indeed were born in the days of his prosperity. The last two, born amid tribulations in the desert, were called with fitting humility Jacob and Joseph. Whether the names of the first four were meant, as those of the last two sons certainly were, to call to mind the circumstances under which they were born, the names are certainly a striking indication of their triple heritage, and it was certainly the custom of Lehi's people to name their children with a purpose. So in talking about these names, the name of Lemuel is not a conventional Hebrew one, for it occurs only in one chapter of the Old Testament. That's Proverbs 31, verses 1 and 4, where it is commonly supposed to be a rather mysterious poetic substitute for Solomon. It is, however, like Lehi, at home in the South Desert, where an Edomite text from a place occupied by tribes descended from Ishmael bears the title, The Words of Lemuel, King of Massa. These people, though speaking a language that was almost Arabic, were yet well within the sphere of Jewish religion, for we have nowhere else any evidence for saying that the Edomites used any other peculiar name for their God than Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews. Laman's name, so Lemuel's the second oldest, Laman's the oldest. Laman's name is discussed below. It is a striking coincidence that Condor saw in the name Lamun as he renders it. The vowels must be supplied by guesswork. A possible corruption of the name Lemuel, thus bringing these two names so closely associated in the Book of Mormon into the most intimate relationship. So Laman and Lemuel might have some original roots in their names or certain variations of corruptions of each other, but they were named clearly for more Arabic groups. Now, Sam is a perfectly good Egyptian name. It is also the normal Arabic form of Shem, the son of Noah. So we can see some connections with Sam, with Shem, the son of Noah. We can also see Egyptian influence in there as well with the name of Sam. Now, Lehi, like Abraham, was the child of a cosmopolitan age. No other time or place could have been more particularly auspicious for the launching of a new civilization than the time and place which he lived. It was a wonderful age of discovery, an age of adventurous undertakings in all fields of human endeavor, of great economic and colonial projects. At the same time, the great and brilliant world civilization of Lehi's day was on the very verge of complete collapse, and men of God like Lehi could see the hollowness of the loudly proclaimed slogans of peace and prosperity. Lehi's expedition from Jerusalem in aim and method was entirely in keeping with the accepted practices of his day. So hopefully you get the picture. There's a ton going on. Now, if we were to equate this to say, how does this fit with Old Testament times? Because this is BC time frame. Lehi would be a contemporary person with Jeremiah and the other prophets at the time. So that's the time period we'd find themselves in. In fact, it's very likely that Lehi and Jeremiah knew each other well and understood each other. Jeremiah had been more called by God to be basically the main prophet at the time. But we could see, just as there were other ones like Amos and other groups that were lesser prophets at the time, Lehi could be seen as one of those lesser prophets based on his experiences that he has. So again, lots of trade, lots of discoveries, lots of things happening, but lots of war. Babylon has recently come through the area and has completely changed everything out and shifted the power balance in the area. And this is where Lehi is trying to raise his family in this crazy, chaotic time, basically. So there's a lot going on. Now, to help put some more perspective and pin this, Shunibli talks about that there were some documents discovered in the Cave of Letters in the Nahal Hever in 1966 show us a number of rich people fleeing from Jerusalem and taking important legal documents with them. So this idea that Lehi is going to leave Jerusalem and flee into the wilderness, some people have looked at this and thought, oh, this is just, weird. Like, why would he ever leave Jerusalem? Well, actually, there's a lot of precedent of this at this time. It says, these show a well-heeled party living in Jerusalem could own estates and ranches off of the south end of the Dead Sea, and even have title to farms in Egypt. To one such estate, a wealthy woman retreated when Jerusalem fell to the Romans. 4 centuries after the burying of the Dead Sea Scrolls, when the barbarians invaded Europe, things were reversed, and rich Roman ladies bought up expensive places in Palestine. to which they could retire in what was then the safest place in the world. This is a picture of landholding and international ties, which is truly surprising, quite modern, and wholly keeping with the affairs of Father Lehi as they're set forth in the Book of Mormon. So lots of things that are happening, just amazing stuff. Now, there is some interesting connections with ideas in the Dead Sea Scrolls that come down to this time frame as well. Hugh Nibley wrote about these, and Hugh Nibley is an LDS scholar, did a tremendous amount of research on ancient writings, ancient histories, in the Book of Mormon and things. He says here, what religious group has not sought aid and comfort from the Dead Sea Scrolls since their discovery? The most crushing argument against the authenticity of the Book of Mormon has ever been its attributing of Christian expressions and ideas to people whose ancestors are supposed to have left Jerusalem 600 years before Christ. How could such people ever have brought New Testament ideas to them? So what he's getting at in this is talking about that Lehi and Nephi and these people, so they're Old Testament people. They're living the law of Moses. But you'll see in the Book of Mormon as we move forward that the teachings of Jesus start to emerge. So in a way, a pre-Christian philosophy starts to emerge in the Book of Mormon before Christ was born. And so some people have used this as a way of saying, well, because Christ wasn't on the earth, you can't have Christ's teachings before he was on earth, because Christ is the originator of the teachings. And so therefore the Book of Mormon can't be historically true. It was a later recreation of Joseph Smith, well after Jesus was alive, that he superimposed this in a pre-Christian concept. And what Hugh Nibley is saying here is that the Dead Sea Scrolls, to the surprise and alarm of the learned, have now broken down the latent artificial barrier which the Jewish and Christian doctors erected between the world of the New Testament and Old Testament. Except where the learned themselves hold sway, they were not two separate worlds at all. Recently, Professor E.R. Goodenough has pointed out with great fullness and clarity that what has long been accepted in the schools as the Jewish tradition is only one Jewish tradition, the rabbinical or horizontal tradition as he designates it. After long years of dedicated effort, the rabbis succeeded in so discrediting and effacing an ancient and genuine rival Jewish tradition that few today, even among scholars of Judaism, are aware of its existence. This older tradition Goodenough calls the mystic or vertical tradition, the term being suggested by the basic belief that the leaders of Israel should have prophetic inspiration, direct vertical ties with the other world revelation, instead of the mere horizontal transmission of knowledge from human teacher to student. To judge by Goodenough's presentation, the Book of Mormon is a mirror of authentic vertical Judaism. So he kind of gets into this idea. So after this, we all know Babylon is eventually going to destroy Jerusalem and this area, about 10 years after Lehi leaves. He's going to be a prophet of that destruction as well. And so we're going to see those prophecies and things as we read. After Babylon destroys them, there's a big change in how things work in Jerusalem. There's a 70-year exile, and then they come back later. And as Judaism tries to mesh itself together with people who've been exiled and people who weren't exiled, Judaism changes. And out of that eventually comes rabbinic Judaism that we have, because the temple is gone. So a lot of liturgical ideas around temple ceremonies and more mystical things tends to go away, and Judaism follows more of a rabbinical philosophy of transferring knowledge through word, transferring information from experts to students. The synagogue begins to emerge, these other concepts and ideas that we would call present-day Judaism or Jewish thought originates around that 500 BC time frame. So the Book of Mormon begins before all that happens. It kind of represents connects with a more mystical style of Judaism, which was more prophetic rather than law giving, basically. So the Midrash, a lot of those books and information on Judaism comes from this idea of more law, legal designations and things, the rabbinic philosophies and ideas that we start to see more of that Jesus encounters in the New Testament times. That was later, after the Babylonian destruction. So Nephi and Lehi and Lehi's family are pre Babylonian destruction. So it's really interesting. Now let's talk about Lehi a little bit in his name. There actually is a place in the Middle East named Lehi, or same lettering of Lehi. So let's look at a few things here about his name. Until recently, this name was entirely unknown save as a place name, but now it has turned up at Elath and elsewhere in the south in a form which has been identified by Nelson Gluck with the name Lehi, which occurs quite frequently either as a part of a compound or as a separate name of a deity or a person, particularly in Mannaean, Talmudic, and Arabic texts. There is a Bet Lahi, or House of Lehi, among the ancient place names of the Arab country around Gaza, but the meaning of the name has here been lost. If the least be said of it, the name Lehi is thoroughly at home among the people of the desert, and so far as we know, nowhere else. So there's a place, Bet Lehi, or Bet Lehi. Bet, B-E-I-T, is the name for house of Lehi. It's a place in southern area of outside of Jerusalem that you can go to and see. It's Lehi is also found in the Old Testament as the term for jawbone. So if you remember Samson and when he killed the Philistines with the jawbone of an ass, that they believe the plain of Lehi, or that area, because it means jawbone, is connected. That could be where this house of Lehi is in southern Palestine areas. There are some settlements, there's some ruins down in that area as well. There's no connection between that area and this man Lehi in the Book of Mormon. We have nothing that connects that to. I know sometimes LDS people or apologists will try to say, oh, look, this proves the Book of Mormon must be true because there's this place called the House of Lehi, and in the Book of Mormon there's a man named Lehi that does have a house outside of Jerusalem and is a great trader and a wealthy man. But there is nothing that directly connects those two together. Now, if we found Nephi and Laman and Lemuel and documents that show those names that lived there, yeah, that could be a pretty good connection. But we don't. Other than the name of the area, we don't have anything else that connects those two together. So just be careful on some of those connections with that. There is a place, but we don't know what it is, how that connection is. So Lehi is found in Jerusalem. All this stuff is happening. The population of Egypt around this time is around 20 to 25 million. There's a lot of people. Even in this area, there's a tremendous amount. Let's see, I had some figures here. 525 population was about 16 million. Even in 800 AD, it was 2.4 million inhabitants. So it dropped off considerably. So they went from like 25 to 30 million people in Egypt, and they just kept precipitating down after this time. So Egypt, at this time when Assyria is being destroyed by Babylon, Egypt wants to believe it's still a world power. Prior to Assyria, Egypt was seen as a major world power, but it's been losing its worth, its value. It's not as influential in the area anymore. After Assyria, Egypt started to decline, and they just continue to decline after that. They tried to make some alliances with Rome when Rome comes around later on, and it doesn't quite work out very well, unfortunately. So these are the things that are going on at this time. Lots of stuff that's happening. Confucius is around, Lao Tse, Buddha, Vardhaman Mahariva, the founder of Jainism, is coming around. Pythagoras, Zarathustra, in the Persian area. There's Pythagoras, the Pythagorean theorem, and those things. We think of him as mathematics, but he actually had a lot of philosophical and religious beliefs and ideas as well. He had some followers. So these are scientists that are around the same time as Lehi. These are spiritual leaders and others that start to emerge around this time, not literally at 600 BC, but around this time frame. So tremendous stuff happening. So let's look into this story a little more here, okay? Chapter 1, hopefully, I know that's kind of a lot, but hopefully start to see, man, is this a wild time. Lots of potential for abundance that they have had and still can have, but tons of war, tons of destruction, whole regime changes happening. So remember, Babylon has recently marched through the area. Nebuchadnezzar's dad took out the previous rulers in Jerusalem who were pro-Egyptian and got rid of them, and has brought in the uncle of the previous king to take over in Jerusalem. Basically, they want Palestine, the Jerusalem area, to be a vassal state for Babylon. And the kind of philosophy is, look, so long as you don't make a mess of things, we're okay to leave you alone. Just pay your taxes, and we're not going to worry about you. Is basically what is kind of the basic agreement that's going on at this time. But of course, Egypt and Jerusalem start making alliances with each other that end up causing this destruction of Babylon when they come back through in about 10 more years after this. So, okay, verse 1. Let's get into this now. I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents, therefore I was taught somewhat in all the learning of my father. So he loves his parents. He thinks they're great parents. He was taught in the learning of his father. So his father's done a lot of traveling. And having seen many afflictions in the course of my days. Remember, during his lifetime, he's recently, so he's probably mid-teens, Nephi's mid-teens maybe. Babylon has marched through the area recently. And so taken out the Assyrian previous rulers of the area. So a lot of disruptions, a lot of trade routes having to be changed. They may have been caught in some things in caravans. A lot of stuff that's happening at this time. And he says, nevertheless, having been highly favored of the Lord in all my days, yea, having had a great knowledge of the goodness and the mysteries of God, therefore I make a record of my proceedings in my days. So now this is Nephi looking back on his time. So he's not writing this while this is happening in Jerusalem. He is already out of Jerusalem and has moved on in his journeys to the American continent. By the time he's writing this down, basically. So he is obviously someone who has studied the gospel. He understands the gospel. Now that means Old Testament. Whenever we think of scripture in the Book of Mormon, we have to realize this is coming from the Old Testament. They are living the law of Moses still. They're still part of that tradition. So this is an important thing for us to look at. Verse 2. Yea, I make a record in the language of my father, which consists of the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians. So he's got Egyptian understanding and Israelite understanding. So he knows these languages. So Hebrew, most likely, as well as Egyptian languages. Nephi knows both of them. He was taught in these. So here's an interesting quote. Again, Hugh Nibley, in his book, Approach to the Book of Mormon, talks about the idea of caravanning here. It says, the merchant went forth in person and personally sought out the places and people that would receive his wares. The caravan visits each place on the route and mingles with the inhabitants of each, while the modern transport employee knows only the overnight quarters at terminals and harbor towns. The traveling merchant of the caravans conveys his goods personally to the buyer, whose taste and temperament he must understand if he is to do business with them. The person-to-person system of trade fostered a lively intellectual and cultural intercourse, as in our own Middle Ages, which was far more effective in spreading ideas than the modern method of the printed word. No temple, no center of culture was ever out of contact with the great world centers. The student was obliged far more than he is today to seek knowledge at the actual sources. In Israel, no one could be an educated man whose knowledge did not have ties with the temples of Babylon or Egypt, or whose degree of education was not judged in terms of how closely it matched both the theoretical and practical teachings of the great centers. Intellectual intercourse was further promoted by the passion for traveling which is inborn in the Oriental. He is not bound to the furrow as the European is. The Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca is a necessary outlet for this vagrant urge, and the Orient has at all times known the wandering scholar. The man who was driven from land to land by wanderlust and the thirst for knowledge, and who covered distances that appeared tremendous, even to our modern means of communication, and did so with means and equipment so limited as to be beyond our comprehension. Cultural conditions in the East threw men together and mixed them up in a brisk give and take of trade and craftsmanship that took no account of language or racial differences in connection. Winkler, as we noted in the preceding lesson, wrote these words by way of explaining conditions in Israel at the time of Zedekiah. They say a good deal for the spirit and background of the Book of Mormon. The Oriental Universalism here described is, as we have said, one of the most strongly marked characteristics of the Book of Mormon. So again, there's a melting pot of stuff. And so for Nephi to be trained in the language of his father, which was Jewish and Egyptian, shows Lehi is transferring this wisdom he's gained to his sons. He wants them to be successful and learn these things as well. Verse 3 says, "And I know that the record which I make is true, and I make it with mine own hand, and I make it according to my knowledge." So he's stating, this is from me, my personal account. Verse 4, "For it came to pass, in the commencement of the first year of the reign of Zedekiah king of Judah, my father Lehi having dwelt at Jerusalem in all his days." So this is, Nephi is now putting us on the time. He's got a timestamp right here. The first year of the reign of Zedekiah. It says, "And in that same year, there came many prophets prophesying unto the people that they must repent, or the great city Jerusalem must be destroyed." So this is really important for us to look at, okay? Let's talk about King Zedekiah. Okay, Zedekiah was not his original name. That was the name that Babylon gave to him when they appointed him king. He's the uncle of the previous king. Because remember, if you remember in the Old Testament, the kingship of Israel was a father-son type concept that they kept passing down. Basically, remember, King David was brought in to be the first king of Israel after the time of judges and things that happened, and then Solomon and Rehoboam and all those down the line is where these kingdoms come from. If you remember in the beginning of the New Testament, in Matthew, they talk about the lineage of Joseph to show the connection of kingship for Jesus. So Zedekiah is an uncle to the king. At this time, there's a little bit of a switcheroo that happens. So instead of father son, after Assyria comes through, and then Egypt tries to put their own person on the throne, they switch them basically. And so after that switch, now Babylon comes through and switches it again, which is interesting because it actually ends up preserving the rightful lineage of the kings so that Jesus can be the king, be that descendant lineage too. So for 3 years, the Pharaoh of Egypt exercised political control of the kingdom of Judah through the puppet Jehoiakim, who's in the Old Testament. You can read about him. Then in the memorable year 605 BC, the Babylonians, which it was Nabopolassar, I believe that was Nebuchadnezzar's dad, marshaled a mighty army and crushed the Pharaoh's cohorts in the battle of Carchemish, and in so doing took the Jewish nation out of Egypt's grasp. So the biblical account of this era is found 2 Kings chapters 23 through 25, 2 Chronicles 36, Jeremiah 26 through 39. You can read about those things. So Assyria is being destroyed by Babylon. So the Assyrian nation is shrinking, and it's shrinking towards the Mediterranean coast. Egypt comes up using ships to help at the city of Carchemish to stop this fighting as Babylon, and with the help of the Medes, or the Persians basically, are just consuming all of Assyria. And now it's getting down to where it's like Nineveh is the capital of Assyria. It's Nineveh, and this little narrow area towards the coast is kind of about all that's left of the Syrian nation. So as Egypt came up to fight at Carchemish, Babylon crushed them. And so Egypt took their boats back to Egypt and went. But while they did that, they also moved south. Babylon moved south and took over Palestine and conquered that area, knowing Egypt's next. So basically, Babylon was like, hey, we're taking out Assyria. Egypt, you're next. So Egypt's a little worried about what's going to happen once Assyria is completely gone, basically. And they knew that Babylon would be a big threat to them, and which is why they're trying to stop it, because if Assyria keeps fighting and has a chance of coming back, and Egypt helps them, then that pushes Babylon off and thus allows Egypt to be saved. But that's not what happened, unfortunately. That's not how it worked out. So now, but the Jewish people did not gain their freedom when they were ruled by Egypt. Instead of Egyptian foreigners ruling their country, Babylonian foreigners took their place. Southern Palestine became a Babylonian vassal state. Unfortunately for all concerned, they allowed the quisling Jehoiakim, Jewish appointee of Egypt, to retain his throne. Before long, the new monarch and his subjects were in revolt. In response, King Nebuchadnezzar moved an army to Jerusalem and laid siege against the rebellious city. About this time, Jehoiakim either died or was taken captive by the enemy, for Jehoiachin, his son, spoke of in the biblical account as surrendering to the Babylonians. These struggles between Assyria, Babylonia, and Egypt took place before the Book of Mormon record opens, but during the lifetime of its early leading characters. When the account commences, 21-year-old Zedekiah, the well-meaning but utterly weak uncle of the ill-fated King Jehoiachin, is spoken of as being in the first year of his reign. So Zedekiah, who's the uncle of Jehoiachin, the previous king of Israel, he is deposed because he was put in by Egypt. Babylon deposes him, puts their own more hopefully pro-Babylonian Israelite ruler in as on the throne of the king of Israel, and changed his name to Zedekiah. His name wasn't Joe. I've got it written down. Anyways, I'll get it to you. And he's only 21 years old. So these are young rulers. So according to the book of 2 Kings, he was appointed to the throne by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. It was a time of great wickedness. It actually was Nebuchadnezzar's dad, most likely. It was a time of great wickedness. Immorality and corruption were rampant. Dishonesty, false swearing, and idolatry were common voices of the day. As if the sins of the people were not already enough to invite God's judgments, Zedekiah chose to follow the disastrous course of Jehoiakim in seeking an alliance with Egypt and scheming a break from Babylonia. It was at this point that the prophet Jeremiah, whose gloomy prophecies had already brought him notoriety in Jehoiakim's day, thundered forth anew the ominous pronouncement that Jerusalem and its temple were doomed for destruction, and the entire nation would be led into captivity if they did not repent and heed the admonitions of the Lord. But the declaration that God would turn against his chosen people and allow his sacred temple and his holy city to be destroyed was considered an outrage. To the incensed priests and princes and prophets, the prophecy was traitorous and bordered on blasphemy. Jeremiah's arrest and imprisonment were ordered. That's from Daniel Ludlow, companion to your study of the Book of Mormon. So here's the thing that's fascinating about this is Jeremiah's time. So if you read the book of Jeremiah and understand that history, that's what was happening at the time that Lehi's in Jerusalem. They're at the same time. That's what's going on. So now we have the pro-Babylonian, he was appointed, the Babylonian appointee as king of Israel, Zedekiah. We're now at the beginning of his reign. So we're going to find out later that Zedekiah again builds an alliance with Egypt, and when Babylon finds out, Nebuchadnezzar finds this out, that what's happening is the goal was that Zedekiah and the Egyptians came up with was that they would form an alliance, and then Zedekiah would foment a revolution against Babylon. And then when Babylon's armies came down, Egyptian armies would come up and surprise them, catch them off guard, and dominate, thus kicking Babylon out and taking over the rule of the Palestine area as a vassal state for Egypt, where they could then enhance their trading partners and be more. It was more of an economically advantageous plan than anything else. When Nebuchadnezzar found out about it, he said, "No, we're not doing this. I've given you guys enough opportunities to change things, and you're not." And that's when he marches down and just annihilates Jerusalem, takes them out. The abomination of desolation type ideas we hear in Daniel, all that stuff that happens. Basically, Daniel's actually probably, there's a lot of speculation that even the prophet Daniel is early mid-teen, so he might be a contemporary with Nephi. that is there. Chris Heimerdinger is an LDS fictional author. He wrote a book called Daniel and Nephi that surmises and theorizes what would have been like if those two had known each other and then went on their separate journeys, where Nephi leaves with his family, but Daniel stays and goes into exile, deals with Persia and the lion's den and all that stuff, and then comes back later. So really interesting that Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, all these guys are in Jerusalem at this time with Lehi. That's what's happening. All these prophets are coming out, prophesying these things, saying we need to change, we need to fix problems in our society. Yes, we have lots of wealth and opportunities, but we are lazy spiritually. We have religion, but it's more just acting religious, not truly believing religion. It's the law of Moses. It's pre-rabbinical times. It's they're acting like they're religious, but they really aren't. It's not unlike what we see in a lot of commerce cities today, of these challenges and problems. So there's still lots of problems and issues and disparities and things that are happening as well. People getting rich because they're stabbing other people in the back, creating underhanded deals and different things like that. Just like in today's world. That's kind of the world that Lehi is trying to raise his family in, basically. And they were told it's going to go away, basically. This is all going to be gone. And Jeremiah, again, went to prison. Actually, he was not technically thrown into prison. He was put in a old well and hoped that he would drown, basically. So these are all the things that are happening at this time, basically. If you want more information, I'll put it in the footnotes. I'll put a link to our blog because I got so many of these. We'll put them all over there that you can go through them as well. So let's go to verse 5. Wherefore it came to pass that my father Lehi, as he went forth, prayed unto the Lord, yea, even with all his heart, in behalf of his people. So Lehi, of course, he's very devout Jew, following the law of Moses, praying to God, trying to work with God, do all his things properly, raise his family well. Verse 6, and it came to pass, as he prayed unto the Lord, there came a pillar of fire and dwelt upon a rock before him. And he saw and heard much. And because of the things which he saw and heard, he did quake and tremble exceedingly. Now, if you think about this, their pillar of fire idea was a common one. Sometimes this happened in the Old Testament times. Remember back in the Exodus, pillar of fire to guide the children of Israel. So Lehi sees something somewhat similar to these other traditions. It says, and he saw and heard much, and because of things which he saw and heard, he did quake and tremble exceedingly. So it's a pretty powerful experience that Lehi has at this time. Verse 7, and it came to pass that he returned to his own house at Jerusalem, and he cast himself upon his bed, being overcome with the Spirit and the things which he had seen. Being thus overcome with the Spirit, he was carried away in a vision, even that he saw the heavens open, and he thought he saw God sitting upon his throne, and surrounded with numberless concourses of angels in the attitude of singing and praising their God. Nibley made a comment on this. He says, surrounding concourses are concentric circles, and singing and praising is never static. It is a dynamic picture with everything in motion, as Lehi sees it, as the cosmic pattern of the thing requires. The prayer circle is often called the chorus of the apostles, and it is the meaning of chorus, which can be a choir, but is originally a ring dance. Nibley had an article about the early prayer circles in history that we get that from. So that's this idea of God being in the middle, concentric rings around him of angels in the attitude of singing and praising their God. In essence, kind of like what we would consider a prayer circle type concept. Verse 9, and it came to pass that he saw one descending out of the midst of heaven, and he beheld that his luster was above that of the sun at noonday. So Lehi's having a vision that's not an uncommon one. I mean, Isaiah had some pretty amazing visions. John is going to have some amazing visions for Revelations. Lots of others did. Ezekiel and others had visions. So Lehi is one of many of these prophets at this time having these grand visions. So we saw this person whose luster was that of above the noonday, sun at noon, super bright person. Most likely this is Jesus he's seeing. Verse 10, and he also saw 12 others following him, and their brightness did exceed that of the stars in the firmament. So if this is Jesus, he's seeing Jesus and 12 apostles probably following him. Again, this is not an uncommon idea. Stars and things represent stuff in Revelations that we'll see 600 years later in John. There's sometimes allusions to Christ through the Old Testament. So we don't have as much as we think. And this is really interesting because the Book of Mormon will actually quote here in the near future Old Testament prophets who aren't in the Old Testament but testify of Jesus Christ. And the Book of Mormon tells us that there used to be a lot more in the Old Testament that testified of Jesus. It was probably removed and taken out because the Christians liked it when Jesus did come around to try to prove Jesus was the real Messiah. And the Jews are like, nope, we don't think you're the real Messiah. So we're going to edit this stuff out so you can't have it. Wouldn't be surprised if that's what happened. So verse 11. And they came down and went forth upon the face of the earth. And the first came and stood before my father and gave unto him a book and bade him that he should read. Now this is really cool too. Every dispensation there's been a book. Adam and Eve and Enoch talk about a book of remembrance, the book of life type ideas. There's Isaiah was to write a book, basically compile what he saw in his angelic visions. Revelations, John was eating a book. He wrote a book. He's had the scrolls. So this idea of books is a common theme in these traditions. Verse 12, and it came to pass that as he read, he was filled with the Spirit of the Lord. And he read, saying, Woe, woe unto Jerusalem, for I have seen thine abominations. Yea, and many things did my father read concerning concerning Jerusalem, that it would be destroyed and the inhabitants thereof. Many should perish by the sword, and many should be carried away captive into Babylon. So this is what Lehi's reading in his vision, the book inside his vision. Jerusalem is to be destroyed. Babylon is going to destroy you. It's going to be gone. And so now realize Babylon has recently come through here and appointed a new ruler. This is the first year of Zedekiah's ruler. And now these prophets are coming out going, nope, Babylon's coming back to destroy us. So this is going to be a little counter what a lot of the prophets talk about. Or I should say, this is part of the reason why Jeremiah got in trouble, because the ruling party said, no, we're working with Babylon, but we're really not, trying to. And the challenge that Jeremiah had was, what he was really saying was, we need to Jeremiah really wanted us to follow Babylon. He's like, look, they're the overlords. They're the rulers. We should follow them and play nice with their rules instead of building an alliance with Egypt. And there was an accusation that someone had been feeding information to Jeremiah to know these things. In fact, we're going to talk about an interesting historical story about that here in a little bit. Verse 14, and it came to pass that when my father had read and seen many great marvelous things, he did exclaim many things unto the Lord, such as, Great and marvelous are thy works, O Lord God Almighty. Thy throne is high in the heavens, and thy power and goodness and mercy are over all the inhabitants of the earth. And because thou art merciful, thou wilt not suffer those who come unto thee, that they shall perish. So this is a heck of a vision. We think of Jeremiah's visions. We think of Ezekiel's visions, Isaiah's visions. Enoch was a great ancient prophet with visions. In the future, John has great visions. So Lehi is in this same genre. Now, verse 15, he says, And after this manner was the language of my father in the praising of his God, for his soul did rejoice, and his whole heart was filled, because of the things which he had seen, yea, which the Lord had shown unto him. Now I, Nephi, do not make a full account of the things which my father hath written. For he hath written many things which he saw in visions and in dreams. And he also hath written many things which he prophesied and spake unto his children, of which I shall not make a full account. So Lehi's got his own writings. This is Nephi writing things down, telling his story And he's saying, I'm not going to get into too much detail because you can read my dad's writings to gather his in, basically. So this is a really important part when you think of Book of Mormon history, because now he's going to say, I'm writing my history, but I'm going to leave my dad's history here for you to read as well. It's a book of Lehi, the 116 manuscript pages that were lost by Martin Harris. So he says, verse 17, continuing on, but I shall make an account of my proceedings in my days. Behold, I make an abridgment of the record of my father upon plates, which I have made with mine own hands. Wherefore, after I have abridged the record of my father, then will I make an account of mine own life. So he's going to take his dad's writings and he's going to incorporate some of them into his book. So we've got the book of Lehi still, and now the book of Nephi is going to have some of his dad's writings in it, but it'll also be couched within the narrative that Nephi is putting in his life also. Verse 18, therefore I would that ye should know, talking to us as readers, that after the Lord had shown so many marvelous things unto my father Lehi, yea, concerning the destruction of Jerusalem, behold, he went forth among the people and began to prophesy and to declare unto them concerning the things which he had both seen and heard. So he's now actively going into and around the Jerusalem area, just like Jeremiah and the others, telling the people, guys, I'm telling you, God showed me a vision. Babylon's going to wipe us out. We need to play nice or we're going to be in trouble. That's the story. If you read Jeremiah, you'll hear a lot of that same narrative and story there. Now, verse 19, and it came to pass that the Jews did mock him because of the things which he testified of them. For he truly testified of their wickedness and abominations. If you want to read chapter 7 of the book of Jeremiah, it goes along with what we're learning right here in this verse. And he testified that the things which he saw and heard, and also things which he read in the book, manifested plainly of the coming of a Messiah, and also the redemption of the world. So there's, even in Jeremiah and others, they talk about that there will be a remnant left, and that the Messiah will come eventually to save the people. So those prophecies are still there, even from King David and on. They still talk about those things as well. And that's in the Old Testament. So verse 20, and when the Jews heard these things, they were angry with him. Yea, even as with the prophets of old, whom they had cast out, and stoned and slain. And they also sought his life, that they might take it away. But behold, I, Nephi, will show unto you that the tender mercies of the Lord are over all those whom he hath chosen because of their faith, to make them mighty even unto the power of deliverance. So there's Lehi is again a part of this group of people that is proclaiming the destruction of Jerusalem that is coming. Now, Jerusalem is a pretty well-fortified city. It withstood, if you remember your Old Testament history, the Assyrians. If you remember, that was not Josiah. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Anyways, the king, remember, he went to Isaiah and said, what should we do? And Isaiah's like, you need to pray and ask God and get the people to repent. So they put a big, huge fast on. Assyria had Sennacherib the first had surrounded the city with his armies and was like, guys, just surrender, give up. You know, your God's not going to save you. No gods have saved anybody yet. Our God has been the victorious one every time. So why should we think it different for your God? Well, then the nation of Israel at the time, people in Jerusalem, they fasted and prayed and asked God to help. And then suddenly 180,000 Assyrian soldiers didn't wake up. They died overnight with no known reason. So Sennacherib's like, I got battles in other places. Let's get out of here. So they left, and Jerusalem was saved. So they believed after Babylon marched through and got rid of Assyria that they would be okay, and Egypt would come help them. The trade, the wealth, the economy was so good that they're overlooking that they've gone away from God. They're more worldly. There's problems, and they're ignoring Jeremiah and the other prophets. The Greeks always regarded the sun. So this is a thought here. Others who proclaim the destruction of Jerusalem. This is something Hugh Nibley put together. He said the Greeks always regarded Solon of Athens as the wisest and best representative of their race. He was a gifted poet, an able soldier, an incurable idealist, and great political theorist and practical politician. He's the real founder of Greek democracy, basically. Behold, the inhabitants of the city are minded to bring about the destruction thereof through their love of gain. They who lead them are of treacherous mind. So this is Solon that he's quoting from Greece. They who lead them are of treacherous minds, but verily great sorrow and lamentation are about to fall upon them in their pride. Behold, they know not how to contain their lust. They heed not the holy foundations of righteousness, which in silence lets things take their course, until the latter end, when surely comes the time of retribution. Behold, a dire destruction cometh upon all the city, and there is none who shall escape. The people have been quick to do iniquity and bring themselves into bondage. As if it had fallen to a foreign enemy, our cherished city is wasted away and consumed by those secret combinations which are the delight of evil men. Thus evil worketh its way among the people, and many of the poor and needy are loaded with shameful chains and sold into bondage in foreign lands. No man findeth security within his own gates, for evil leapeth over the high wall and finds him out, even though he hideth himself in the secret recesses of his innermost chamber. So that's this same idea that even Solon saw it in his people. So Jerusalem is in a spot of transition, and this is where we find Lehi and his family. And so now they're starting to hate Lehi and push against him in these challenges. But like Nephi said in his commentary right at the very end, his purpose of telling us this story is to show how God blessed the family through their righteousness in preserving them from the destructions of Jerusalem that is coming in about 10 years from this time. So let's jump over to the next chapter as we continue the Book of Mormon.